Hello, I'm Tom Parker and welcome to Voices from the CEPS Ideas Lab. In this episode, I spoke with Cecilia Malmström. Cecilia was first elected as a member of the European Parliament in 1999, before becoming Minister for EU Affairs in the Swedish government from 2006 to 2010. Following this, she served as European Commissioner for Home Affairs, and then European Commissioner for Trade until 2019. During our interview, we discussed the global trade outlook, focusing on trade wars, tariffs, geopolitics, and the role the EU is playing in global trade. Since we recorded this, and following the United States' 25% tariff on European aluminium and steel, the EU responded with its own countermeasures on US exports, set to commence on April 13th, worth up to 26 billion euros, and matching the economic scope of the US tariffs. In the last 24 hours, President Trump announced a global 25% tariff on cars, which will affect Europe's automakers, who, I'm sure, will be waiting to see the strength of the EU's response. In light of this, Cecilia's views offer a superb understanding of the intricacies of global trade. I hope you enjoy the episode. Well, Cecilia, welcome. Thanks very much for being here. Appreciate your time.
It's great being here.
Look, it's a big topic, and I want to look at global trade. What are some of the biggest challenges and most significant challenges you foresee for global trade over the coming years?
Well, I think that trade has changed considerably the last years, and it's going to get worse. I mean, the time where we just liberalized trade and we took away tariffs and we sort of engaged in big trade agreements, that's not really the case now. Trade has become much more geopolitical. Very transactional, if you ask President Trump, but more geopolitical from the US side, but also from China side. And that affects trade. And trade is very much about national security. It's not so much about liberalization. And then we have all the other things that has affected trade, like industrial policy, subsidies. There's been a massive raise of subsidies all over the world. Not necessarily all bad, but it affects your trading partners, right? And then we have, of course, the influence of the green transition. Trade has to play its part in the green transition. But the worst thing is probably that the organization that sort of supervises trade, WTO, is so weak. So it's still there. It still has 166 members. But many important players are not following the rules, and the organization itself is not up to it, not really up to the rules we would have needed today. And I think this will increase. And what we see today with trade wars, with transactionalism, where everything is on the table, it could be Greenland or Panama Canal or Ukraine or tech rules, not really, well, tariffs as well. That makes it very difficult to sort of negotiate agreements.
Okay, so then how does the EU proactively address some of these challenges?
Well, the EU is actually trying to keep up with the good old trade. So it is still doing trade agreements, concluded one with Mercosur just before Christmas, one with Mexico recently, is engaging with India, Malaysia, Indonesia, Australia. It has more trade agreements than any other partner in the world. But of course, faced with a possible global trade war, it has to rethink a little bit. A combination of retaliation, possibly, but also try to find some kind of deal, but also diversifying our needs. If we talk about the US, we trade a lot with the US. It's an important trading partner, but that's why we need all the other trade agreements as well.
I want to look a little bit about emerging economies and countries. How does the EU, in your opinion, strengthen some of the trade relationships with emerging economies, but also make sure that it's doing so in a sustainable way with fair trade practices, etc.?
Well, that's very important. The agreement concluded with Mercosur, which is concluded for the second time, actually, but it was amended with a chapter, I think, of 15 pages with sustainability to try to engage with the Mercosur countries, notably Brazil, because, of course, course, with the Amazon, trying to set rules that are perceived as fair from both sides. And in all trade agreements, there is a sustainability chapter. I think also EU has learned to be a little bit more humble in the way that, yes, there are international conventions, they should be in there, but it's not only you do as we say, it's like we try to find a solution, which has also, with carbon fees, for instance, the CBAM, that has to be included in the agreement. The whole Commission was last week in India trying to find some kind of a smaller trade deal. And I know sustainability is important for us, for them, but it will be difficult to agree with there. But it has to be on the agenda. But we have to address it as partners.
With the rise of protectionism, not just in some of the countries you may expect, but it's a growing problem of protectionism around the world. What strategy should the EU adopt to promote free trade and also maintain its influence in the global trading system?
Well, I think the EU, despite the weakness of the WTO, should continue to work. There's a big group of countries there who actually want rules and predictability. So we should continue working with them and see if we can't agree, all of us, which is not possible any longer, we should pursue a sort of strategy of aggressive plurilateralism, work with those who want to have agreements on maybe subsidies or on carbon fees or on sustainability related matters, e-commerce, for instance, and try to do it within the helmet of WTO, but maybe in parallel for those who want to join, and then engage where there's less protectionism. I would say that in Asia, the CPTPP, the agreement that was initially sort of created to keep China out of the US and its ally, and then the US left, but it's there. The UK just entered, for instance, and there's a whole waiting list of countries who want to go on in. And they set new rules, new standards that will be very important for trade in the future, in the digital area, for instance, in the labor rights area. So I think the EU should be in there as well to try to work with. These are friends and partners, quite like-minded, most of them.
How easy is it to change and evolve and update trade policies? Does it take quite a while to have an idea and then to come into effect, or is it quite reactionary to big global macroeconomic sort of changes?
Well, it used to be, we met with Japan and we said, we don't have a trade agreement, let's do a trade agreement. And then you negotiate, it takes a lot of years.
Yeah.
And that's still happening. But of course, with things happening so quickly, what was accurate then, and then 5 years later, we have to talk about AI, we have to talk about digital things. So we have to be much more quick. And that probably speaks for maybe less ambitious trade agreements. And then you have the transatlantic relationships. I mean, if President Trump's put all kinds of issues on the table, there's no way you can negotiate a trade agreement, including Greenland and Elon Musk's tech rules. So the EU has to be tough as well, and to say, yes, we are willing to talk, we can do, an agreement in this, but also willing to strike back if necessary.
If you could hope of a best outcome, if there was a dream scenario over the next 5 years, what would you see as some of the biggest changes in sort of global trade and practices and the evolution of how countries interact from a trade point of view?
Well, I would hope that a majority of the countries of the world who still think it's worth to have global rules, because they have led to prosperity and to growth, and they brought us a lot of good things, that we together with them would sort of come together and say, okay, the US doesn't want to play, China maybe in some areas, but not all, but the rest of us. Let's see what we can do. Let's try to at least between us keep up rules, the norms, the standards. Let's facilitate trade. We all need to diversify. We all need to know what's going to happen tomorrow with our different steps in the value chains and so on. So maybe a broader coalition of like-minded countries who are trying to save the system. Maybe it's idealistic, but it's worth trying.
And perhaps, and tell me if this is too much, but with the Trump factor of being so difficult to know which way he's going to go at any one point, and to come up with big claims and then not know whether he's going to one day go with them or not, has it made it a much harder environment now to react to?
But it has also made a whole lot of countries bloody angry. So sorry, my French, but we could stick together. Okay, let's retaliate together, huh?
Yeah.
Get that one then. Let's see how we can work with the UK, with Canada, with Mexico, with Australia, with Japan, and other countries who will also be affected with this. And then maybe, okay, you strike us, we strike back, and then we move to facilitate trade between us, because that's good for our companies, that's good for our citizens.
As a sort of mini magnum opus, as though it was your last resounding thing, just to give some hope and some I suppose, prosperity to future-looking trade policy, what would you say? What would be your call to arms?
Well, again, there are many countries in this world. There are 200 other countries than the US. And if the US are not following the rules right now and they are totally disengaging, okay, but the rest of us are much more powerful together. We can trade more with each other. We can show the benefits for our citizens, for our companies, for our economies. And we should do that. We should come together. And then hopefully the US will come in 2 years, in 4 years, who knows? But we need to cooperate much better than the rest of us.
Absolutely. Cecilia, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Talk soon. Bye-bye.